the Evolution Security Podcast. Hello, everybody. This is the Evolution Security Podcast. We are on here for another fun episode. I think this one might be a little bit of geekdom. You know, Eric and I were band geeks, and you know, I'm an accountant. You know, there's all kinds of nerdiness going on in here, and then just bringing in the trifecta of super geekdom. We've got John Hearne on again. Repeat offender John Hearne. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm just glad I have retired so I can fill in the holes in your schedule, apparently.
Sounds good.
Well, John, I'll just add this. We'll have you on as often as you would like, because you are a wealth of knowledge, fun to hang out with. So, yeah, we're kind of glad that we're going to be the beneficiary, possibly.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I think before we dig in here, we got a couple of things to mention real quick. I'm going to hand it to you real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to John Valentine. We're going to keep mentioning the fact that the 2024 Combative Summit is going to be the 20th through the 22nd of September. And I want you guys to go out to combativesummit.com. Goodness, it's tripping over my words, and check out that information on there. We will be throwing a spot in as well, but I'll just use that as a quick shout out to John and his event.
Excellent. Well, then we also want to mention a sponsor, and that is Tenacor. We are thankful that we've been working with Tenacor since the beginning of this show, and Jeff Mao is a great friend of ours and frankly just an incredible designer of carry solutions. And I was just going to mention that they just started releasing some dedicated SIG P365 and 365X holsters in the Cartoon 3. And that the difference is they've been offering P365 holsters, but they've been based on the XL, and they haven't offered them compatible with the safety. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know why you want a safety on a striker fire gun, but hey, I digress. But yeah, they are offering that new holster. Go to their website and take a look at what they have. In my opinion, the Velo 4 holster, if you carry appendix, if you carry a compact or subcompact or even a larger pistol, I don't think there's a better appendix holster than the Velo 4. So go to tenacor.com and check out what they have. Well, Eric and John, just speaking of earlier, the geekdom of being an accountant, I'll tell you what, I can tear up Excel. I make a living in Excel. I usually have about 12 spreadsheets open at once. It's like shooting with two guns, like in a movie or something like that, right? But here's some Excel magic. Did you guys know you could create targets in Excel?
Not in
Excel. I did not know that. I just used Word for that over the years.
Oh, did you?
Well, that's easier. You don't have to be an Excel geek to do that.
Well, but here's the deal. The opposite for me, I can't use Word like I can use Excel. But so I just wanted to say real quick. So I've got an 8-hour class that I'm teaching this weekend, which is an intermediate defensive pistol class. We call it our defensive pistol 2 class, and I'm going to be doing some build drill assessments. And so taking Tom Given's Rangemaster IDC courses, instructor development course, he goes through, of course, the concept of creating targets. Well, I went with that. This is a multi-purpose small target, but notice the gray I use the gray color based on his research on how well that works with multiple lighting. And I mean, just those amazing EvoSec logos for these logos, Eric, are for zeroing. Two pillars training, all logos, cool. Eric, these two triangle logos are for sighting in your AR at 50 yards, getting your red dot zeroed, and
Awesome.
this is the right size to do a 10-yard zero on your pistol dot.
Excellent.
So I figured you guys might think those are cool. Those will be on sale for free for anyone that wants any.
Aaron, where will we find those incredible targets?
Email me.
No, you gotta have that link ready to pop, man.
And I can throw them on the website. I need to be updating stuff on our website. That's one thing I can throw up there for anybody who wants to download them.
Yeah, I think they're pretty cool. Well, we've got some, all joking aside, we've got some pretty serious stuff to talk about. And we've got John Hearne on purpose because he's great at analyzing these things. So, Eric, I'm going to throw it back to you to bring John back in.
Absolutely. Well, John, again, we certainly welcome you to the show. We're going to give you a break tonight regarding the bio. You're probably tired of giving your bio these days, aren't you?
I'm tired of it because I like talking to people. So, if that's the price I have to pay, that's the price I have to pay.
But we'll point folks back to some of John's earlier interviews so you can check that out. But John, what is your current gig right now? At least just tell our audience that for now.
I'm a recently retired law enforcement officer, which is about the best kind of law enforcement officer to be. I started back in 1992 carrying a revolver. I ended up as a field supervisor with my agency, Firearms Instructor, active shooter, all the active, officer risk, all the instructor certs, all that kind of stuff in the background as well. And I'm just a nerd overall. Love data, love crunching numbers, that sort of thing.
Well, awesome. So your main focus right now is 2 pillars training?
Yeah, I had a training camp in my 4th year now. It started. What I'm trying to do is always going to ask, well, what are the 2 pillars? And the whole idea is what I've always done is, the first pillar is peer-reviewed scientific research because I can get into the university libraries and dig through those. But then I try to combine that with what we now recognize as real-world best practices. So what I'm trying to do is bring those 2 together and kind of synthesize something that hasn't been done a whole lot of in the training industry so far. We'll see how this goes. It may or may not work. I've either cracked the code and I have a unique new business model, or there's a reason nobody has ever done this successfully. We'll find out in the next couple of years.
Well, John, not blowing smoke up your rear, but you're one of the folks in the industry that we honestly trust the most with that type of information. So we've been following you, as you know, for many, many years. And so, yes, we believe that you've got a incredible niche inside the market. And, and you may have not have wanted this piece, but we also know that, the late, great Dr. William April, some of his work in the industry, you've kind of had to take on a little bit of that mantle. We're not saying that Dr. William April can be replaced. Nobody can replace him, but you do an awesome job of taking a lot of what he does had done and do that justice as well, John.
Well, I mean, like William and I were pretty tight. Like he was one of my groomsmen. We probably met back in the early aughts when Thunder Ranch was still in Texas. So we were always pretty tight. I like to say that we're working, the analogy I always use, we're working the same field, just different sides of it. He was a really good storyteller and did a lot of his stuff through narrative. I do all my stuff through data with some stories mixed in. So we're kind of covering the same information. It's just a slightly different edge. If you're interested in that, I'll throw it out here. I just published my first mainstream magazine piece in Recoil's Off Grid. So there's like a 5,000 word essay that's a really good take on criminal backgrounds, motivations, and stuff like that. And I know I've made the big time because right before we started recording, my buddies, one of my work buddies sent me a note. He's like, "You're in the Safariland newsletter this year." So they were, they haven't been impressed with anything else I've done, but apparently landing in the Safariland newsletter was a big deal at the old workplace.
Well, John, I read that article in Recoil. It's an excellent article, and I'll try to throw that, I'll throw it in the show notes as well. But yeah, so the biggest reason we thought to have you on here, John, is the new FBI's, what used to be the UCR, and it's kind of like they still use the UCR inside some of the data that they're using now, but we now know it as the NIBRS. And, we were talking off recording just a minute ago, and I had just noticed personally, we had a right around a 30% increase. That's by the UCR. And I had seen numbers, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think I saw some Bureau of Justice Statistics numbers that during that same time frame, it was more like around 44% possible increase in murder. I'll let you, again, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But bottom line, that was between 2019 and 2020, if I have my information correct. And lo and behold, the NIBRS happened to be instituted the very next year. So to me, it really seemed like those numbers just didn't seem to jive. But, I'll just ask you, what are your thoughts on that? Was that convenient for the current administration that they could have those numbers change that manner?
Well, I think it's really hard to say this one definitive thing. I think of it more as a perfect storm. So, number one, did the current administration benefit from a smudging of the crime numbers? Yeah. Is there an ongoing campaign to downplay the change in violent crime reporting? I think absolutely. John Lott wrote an unpublished letter to USA Today talking about what the realities of violent crime numbers are. Because if you think I'm a numbers dude, John Lott is like the numbers dude, right?
Yeah.
So the downplaying of violent crime in this country has unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, become a very hot political topic, kind of like open borders, which I think is something you want to talk about as well. So you have this combination of stuff where the data being more obscured is definitely benefiting those in power. But, you can never, ever underestimate or overestimate just bureaucratic incompetence, right? Crime reporting is this kind of weird area, at least the UCR is, where the feds are making locals do stuff. And if you've ever watched any kind of movies, you see what that relationship is like. Probably the best handling, by the way, of the feds by the locals was in the movie Mulholland Falls. You might want to go back and look that one up, but it is quite educational. But you are in this awkward situation where the feds are asking the locals to do something, and their responsiveness kind of depends on where you are. The first year that NIBRS was instituted, only about 66% of the population was actually covered by that new set of data. I mean, 2021 is effectively a lost year for crime data. We're never going to know what happened to crime in 2021 at this point. The 2022 data is probably equally sketchy. What everybody, this sounds weird, but I swear it's the truth, is that the FBI consistently underreports the numbers, in that we have a good alternative. We don't know much about all the other crimes out there. We can speculate some, but we know about homicide, right? So, I don't have I haven't updated my little spreadsheet here for this year, but the CDC finally, and again, you want to be convenient, CDC finally released the 2022 homicide data, right? Because CDC data comes from mandatory reporting of healthcare professionals. So I guess as long as the body's kind of found, we know what that is. I mean, obviously, if the body's out in the woods, CDC isn't going to have those numbers. But the FBI has been missing, in the recent years, almost 40% of the homicides occurring in the country. It's really weird because you can look at the FBI, you can look at news stories, and the FBI say that homicides are in the 20,000s. But if you actually go out to the FBI's crime data reporter, they are showing literally a much lower homicide number, right? I have my spreadsheet up too. 2022 is showing 17,189 homicides. And again, I don't have the CDC number handy, but when I did the math, they were short by about 40%. So again, the FBI just consistently underreports the homicides, and homicide is the crime that is most likely to be counted well because there's a body you kind of have to account for. So the big question everybody has is, if the FBI is missing this percentage of the homicides that are going on in the country, what percent of the other stuff are they missing? And again, referencing John Lott, there was a really interesting essay he had on his where the FBI isn't even accurately reporting the data that's being provided to them. So they were able to go back and they cited a couple of cities. One of the ones that stuck in mind was like, you can go to the city of Nashville and look at their crime stats that are published by the city, and the FBI doesn't even have all that information. So I don't know if that's a
Wow.
miscoding error or what's going on, but dude, that the FBI crime data with every passing year just seems to be a little less relevant and a little more suspicious, especially when it benefits prevailing political parties.
Well, and John, one other point that I saw on John Lott's piece is that, and I had heard this, but the fact that in 2021, the same year that the NIBRS came out, or first was started, and then the numbers were counted. I'll just use those words, counted. So, incidentally, Chicago, LA, and New York City stopped reporting. So you got 3 extremely violent cities, if not some of the most violent, are also not included in those NIBRS numbers, right?
Yeah, I know that some cities were missed. The other thing is, it's like I don't know about anything about the quality of the data from LA. I haven't heard any huge scandals with them, but the Chicago data has been questioned for years as to how dramatically underreporting and downplaying those events are. So, the classic example I always use is my wife actually used to work for the PD. She goes to a bar where this dude has taken a beer bottle and smoked this dude in the gourd, shattered the beer bottle, jumped up to mount the guy and carve his face up with a broken beer bottle when security, pulls him off. PD shows up. That guy is knocked unconscious, taken to the hospital, right? They go to the office to do paperwork, and how are you going to code this? Well, anywhere else, you would think that would be an aggravated assault because it was an assault using a weapon, causing great bodily harm, that loss of consciousness, stitches, that kind of stuff like that. But when they go to code that, that simply went as a simple assault, right? So police departments don't have a vested interest in accurate crime numbers. And sometimes they'll put a subtle finger on the scale. But you've got some agencies like, Chicago is obviously the big one. They're not putting like a finger on the scale. Like there's like a, 25-pound dumbbell on the scale when it comes to reporting their numbers. Some people even question their veracity at all. So again, relying on the UCR data, you just have to take all that stuff with a grain of salt. I think John Lott's take, looking at, we probably need to share the link, but like he wrote up talking about how there's this horrible perfect storm where the public seems to be losing faith in law enforcement. As law enforcement are solving less and less crimes, people are simply less likely to report them, right? That third time somebody sticks a gun in your ribs and you hand them the decoy wallet, because that's what they had to do back in New York City in the 70s. I mean, the third time, are you going to sit around and wait for 2 hours for a patrol car to show up and go, too bad, so sad? Or are you just going to chalk that up as the cost of doing business? So the incentive for reporting crime has been getting worse and worse as the clearance rates are getting bad. And, people don't realize how bad the clearance crisis is in this country. I don't know if you want to riff on that or not, but it's not happy, upbeat news.
Well,
so because
to your, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. No, you got ahead.
So I was just going to, and you can add commentary to, but yeah, bottom line, as John Lott put in his piece, and it's called "The Collapse in Law Enforcement as Arrest Rates Plummet. People have been less willing to report crime." And absolutely, I'll throw this link in the show notes. But yeah, so arrests are down, so people stop reporting crime, right? So yeah, you were going to expound on that, John. Go ahead, buddy.
Well, I just because all I do is listen to podcasts and news. I thought it was interesting. They were talking about the crime reporting crisis in San Francisco. There's a great YouTube channel called California Insider, and they had a little blurb on what was going on in Chicago or San Francisco. And they looked at the shoplifting numbers for San Francisco. And San Francisco PD had reported like 800 cases of shoplifting for like a year. And they're like, what the hell is this? That there's no way that's right. And what San Francisco PD clarified was that those were only the shoplifting cases involving violence, right? That was where the shoplifter had gotten violent and attacked somebody as part of the shoplifting. All the other shopliftings were under the California, the Prop 47, every $949 is walking out. Dude, that's not even being tracked or recovered. That's not being tracked at all. So again, the numbers are pretty suspicious as far as that goes. And, we've kind of changed the incentive system on everything. But, people don't realize that people, have been, kind of raised with this dragnet mythology of just the facts and, hardworking police officers and stuff like that. But there's only so much a hardworking police officer can do in the current political climate, right? But, I've got the clearance data for 2022, right? And you have to remember, this is the FBI clearance data of crimes known to police. So we already know that only about 42% of the violent crimes are actually reported to the police to begin with. So when we give you these clearance numbers, this is the percentage of numbers that we know, not the ones that we don't know. Our overall violent crimes, crimes against person, was only cleared at about 41, or cleared by arrest 41%. Cleared overall about cleared by arrest only 34% of the time, right? That's not very optimistic. And when you start looking at homicide, for the first time, I think in recent memory, actually clearing by arrest now is only happening about half the time, right? Only about half the homicides in this country are being cleared now.
Wow.
We've dropped below 50%. And in some places like Chicago, that number's in the 30s as far as that stuff goes. So, again, as the police's ability to clear crimes for all the reasons that's making that more difficult is happening, people simply aren't reporting the offenses to the police. So we've got this weird fact pattern where, maybe the crimes reported to the police appear to be going down, right? But there's no way that makes sense. The property crime numbers have tracked pretty well. A Lott piece talked about how the violent crime numbers aren't tracking with the property crime numbers. The property crime numbers are showing an increase. And it's like, how do we reconcile these things? And I think the ugly truth is we really can't reconcile these fact patterns as anything, but we're not getting the full picture.
Well, John, if I can just add a couple of thoughts. And, looking at John Lott's data, violent crime arrest in big cities is down between 38% and 58%, And another thing, if I can just add this, all the data that you're discussing there. So what does that result in the media? Well, let's read a couple of comments off of John Lott's piece. Says that the American news media has been working overtime to convince people that violent crime is dramatically falling. Here's some typical headlines from ABC News and NPR. Quote, U.S. stats show violent crime dramatically falling. So why is there a rising clash in perception? I don't believe the statistics, said Arroyo Sona, I'm going to mess her name, Morris, a Trump supporter. I find it interesting that they had to put that in there. Bill Hutchinson, U.S. stats show violent crime dramatically falling. So why is there a rise in clash in perception? And I just repeated myself there. I apologize, audience, and my fellow gentlemen on the screen here. Violent crime is dropping fast in the U.S., even if Americans don't believe it. Anyway, I'll just stop there. So that's what the snide media is saying. So they look at these incorrect numbers, that the FBI puts out there, and they get to reference that as, hey, crime's drastically reducing, but the American people know better. Even if it may be anecdotally, American people know that violent crime is increasing, or crime overall is increasing. Your thoughts on all of that?
I think you're absolutely right. The other thing that I'd point out is that this does seem to be a geographic specific, in that the things really went bad in the cities over a given population. I think you said what that was, right? So if you're living in rural America, your risks of criminal victimization, as long as you stay there, probably haven't gone up significantly. What's really the people most hit by this are the people living in these large urban areas, generally in the poorest parts of the town. So this is like one of the great paradoxes of police reform, the Michael Brown movement, all that kind of stuff, is that the people that they claim to be helping have been the most impacted negatively by the proposed changes that they've done. Your chances, if you're a black male, your chances of being a victim of a homicide have actually gone up fairly dramatically. The huge spike we saw in homicide was not distributed across the various demographics equally. That was a very black and brown change in homicide figures.
Well, and another key point about that, in those larger cities, they're also very anti-Second Amendment, individuals carrying pistols too. So that's another aspect that's pretty crappy.
Well, and if you want to root for a second on the Second Amendment, I mean, look what New York State did with their prohibited areas. The Supreme Court said very clearly you cannot make the entire city a protected place. But New York has turned right around and basically made the entire, island of Manhattan a special place, just like it was the White House or something. They're flagrantly thumbing their nose at the Supremes as far as what they said the Second Amendment actually means. I mean, I'm not sure of all the facts, but there was a local news story in New York City where a shop owner shot and killed or shot and wounded 2 thieves. And they're looking at a year for the robbery, and he's looking at 7 years for the use of force. Don't know whether the facts support that was a good use of force or not. But, there used to be a time in this country where when you put the coin in, you dance to the tune, right? And the idea that the shop owner is going to get 7 years and those guys at the most are going to get 1 just strikes as a lot of people. It's just fundamentally wrong.
Well, and then you add to it all of the DAs that have been, essentially funded by, and I won't even, I'm trying not to sound like, Alex Jones, and I think Alex Jones gets a lot of things right. But let's just face it, George Soros and his organizations, and I say that plural, is they've been voting in or helping get voted in DAs that don't prosecute crime. Luckily we're seeing some revolting from the people in some of these cities. It's not fast enough and not enough. But yeah, I mean, you add to it that factor, and to use your word, a perfect storm. So it is amazing to me, though, that we got so many people in the media, trying to act as though, hey, everything's great, crime's down. So we know that that's not true, obviously, from this data.
Why would that be that these media people would latch on that stuff to try and give good news like that?
Well, I think rhetorically we know we got an election coming up. That's a big factor, and that's probably what you're hitting at, Aaron.
Yeah.
I would think that, there's probably 3 big topics, just speaking generally, trying to be nonpartisan here, that the public is really fixated on: open borders, crime, and inflation. And on none of those topics is the current occupant of the White House really setting the world afire, right? So I think it's very much an effort like in those 3 critical areas, because they start to get into the point where they directly affect people as far as that stuff goes. They're becoming a lot less abstract and a lot more the reality of a lot of people's lives. As far as this stuff goes. And, again, California Insider has some great takes on this, but it's like, they've managed to recall, I think the district attorney in San Francisco, the district attorney that covers Oakland they've got enough signatures to make that a ballot initiative. But generally they have to, completely crash the ship into the rocks before anything happens. And what nobody wants to admit, what nobody wants to address, is that in the process of crashing the ship that hard, they've killed and harmed and destroyed the quality of life of the people that they claim to be protecting. It's almost at a certain point that what they say they're trying to do is not what they're actually trying to do.
Well, absolutely correct, John. And the other aspect that I continue to think about, that you just mentioned, is we've not really seen the real results of the last couple of years. And when we're seeing some of it, but I think it's going to continue to be on the rise, and that's the borders, like you mentioned. I'll just talk about something I personally saw. So I was supporting an exercise down in what we used to call Fort Polk, Louisiana. It's called Fort Johnson now, and I was getting on a plane to head back home, and there was I would say there was probably 30 or 40 clearly illegals, and they were given an envelope, this manila envelope. Everybody seemed to have the same envelope, right?
Wow.
And I'm sitting there looking at some of them. I'm like, how many of these are actually either Mexican origin or South America origin? Only about half of them. Guys, I kid you not, there was at least half of them looked Middle Eastern. Every single one of them military age males, right? There was no females, there were no children. And we were talking to some of the folks at the counter with American Airlines, and they said that they see that nearly daily. So,
okay, so you're saying that these clearly illegal aliens, undocumented workers, or immigrants, whatever euphemism you want to say,
unlicensed world travelers.
Well, so Eric, what you're saying, you witnessed them basically being handed free plane rides someplace?
That's what it looked like to me. Absolutely. And where they came from at that point, I'm not sure, but we know that's what's happening, is that folks coming across at any point at the border, from California all the way through Texas, up in Canada, they're being shipped into cities every single day. Yep. Go ahead.
How much you want to bet each one of those envelopes assigns them to a swing state?
Wouldn't surprise me.
Different ones, they're just shipping them out to different swing states.
Yeah, and then there's we talked about this on the air not too long ago. There's a new program where people there, and forgive me, I don't have the exact app in front of me right now, but there's an app that people in foreign countries can go on and essentially request asylum. And if they pay for the ticket themselves, they can fly into various large cities in the United States right now. And I'm forgetting exactly what it's called. I didn't have it right in front of me, but that is a fact, that is happening.
Well, I do have a question. So about the NIBRS system. Will what they are purporting to do with these changes going to this new type of data collection, is it going to be effective, do you think, John?
So let's table that for 1 second, because we have to give full service. If you want your readership to freak out, you can generally find there's a reporter. He did a lot of war correspondent work and stuff like that by the name of Michael Yon, like Y-O-N. Just Google Michael Yon in the Darien Gap. They have done an awesome job of documenting. It's not just a large influx of, if you went into the cool lingo, there's Mexicans and other than Mexicans in the U.S. Border Patrol system, right? Everybody's either a Mexican or they're an OTM. But the amount of Chinese nationals that are all military males is what should really be freaking everybody out. Absolutely. And Michael Yon, I mean, he's, whether it's the Sean Ryan podcast, he's gotten a lot of coverage. You can find probably about 20 different episodes somewhere where they discuss that. And that's the kind of stuff we really need to be worrying about. As part of that, they've documented, literally, people sitting in airports. I'm about to have to go get my driver's license swapped over because it's not a real ID. So I'm gonna have to go and pay, whatever I owe to the DMV, produce a birth certificate and stuff like that to get a driver's license, so I'll be able to fly next year. And they're literally waiving all the exact same requirements for identification, security backgrounds, and stuff like that. And literally, as you said, putting people on planes and flying them all across the country.
Well, and I think the numbers I saw between last fiscal year and up till now is that number of Chinese MAMs or military-aged males is around 46,000. And that was nearly zero a few years ago. And I would submit this, and I think we hit on this not too long ago as well, is the Chinese government does not just let its people leave the country, right? To my knowledge. So if those numbers used to be close to zero several years ago, and now they've, been this huge increase, and now that those numbers well over, 50,000 to my knowledge, yeah, that ought to concern everybody.
You put this in political light of everything that's going on. There's been a lot of concerns with a possible change in administration. Do the Chinese really want to take Taiwan and stuff like that? And I think that everything that is a strength can also be a weakness. So I think that as a country, one of our greatest strengths has been our openness, right? But the problem is that we've kind of had this goody two shoes view of the world, where all of our basic infrastructure is just really vulnerable to attack. So it's not going to take 40,000 military-aged males to really screw up everything. You could have a small core of well-trained people. You shoot transformer stations with conventional rifles and let the coolant leak out, right? It's the power grid was not great to begin with. As we push toward electrical cars, regardless of whether the grid can actually keep up with them or not, right? We're building this very complex system that has all these massive vulnerabilities, and just kind of singing la 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 and skipping through life as if nothing bad could ever happen. And it becomes an interesting question. Suppose that the Chinese do move against Taiwan, and the United States, through its intelligence services, knows that there's 10,000 people willing to wreak havoc. At what point does that inhibit our ability to involve ourselves in that conflict and say, hey, maybe we just sit this one out, right? It's almost like a blackmail situation where they don't actually have to blow up anything. We just have to know that they possess that capability.
Yeah, and I think if I get these numbers wrong, forgive me, but I think it would only take a handful. What was it, like 17 stations throughout the United States to take down the whole grid? And I think I saw that would take down the grid for a couple of years.
Dude, we're getting to be older now, and we just forget that everybody else has forgotten everything. But I mean, 2 words: Beltway snipers. I mean, dude, those people they didn't just shut down DC. They ranged as far south as the Richmond, Virginia area. I mean, people were afraid to gas their cars out in public. That was, that was 2 dudes with a freaking Bushmaster. You know what I'm talking
Yep.
about? That's not a very high bar to shut down. That's not a very high requirement to shut down everything. So I think, we've got some incredible vulnerabilities. I think that part of the price we pay for being the kind of society we are is we are going to have a certain amount of openness and vulnerability, but we don't have to make it easy. That's all I ask is like, let's just secure the border. Let's, I used to think it was crazy. Now I think it's not so crazy. Let's just have a moratorium on immigration for 2 years. Get everybody sorted out, send everybody back, make a commitment that if you're in the country unlawfully, we're going to send you back home. Not trying to be political, but it was really weird. I've been in law enforcement for 31 years. For 4 years during the Trump administration, if I had somebody in this country unlawfully, and if you like caught them DUI or something like that, right? All you had to do was make a call, and that person was gone. And I think that's a fair case. Can you live within our rules, be respectful of our laws, not endanger our citizens? If not, you need to go somewhere else. And it was only during that Trump presidency in which, if you got popped for a DUI, there was no, monopoly. It was like go directly back home as far as that stuff goes. So we've had the will in the past. The question is whether we're gonna. We certainly don't have it now. The question is whether we'll have it in the future.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And I think ultimately, I hope that it helps the American people make the right decision. And sometimes, again, it is hard not to sound partisan. But I say this all the time. I've said this recently with a discussion with a colleague, and this was based around Second Amendment data, is that I would like to think that I am intellectually honest enough to say that if the data showed that an armed populace was detrimental to society, meaning that it was worse for us to be armed, then I would start supporting not having a Second Amendment. I know that is crazy talk, but I'm being serious. If I saw real data that supported that, I would likely be behind it. So if we see data,
you care about the safety of yourself and the entire country, so why wouldn't you seek the best system that would at least enhance safety?
And just so any of our audience members out there that may be freaking out thinking that I'm supportive of that, of course I'm not. I'm using it as a rhetorical example. Turning that on the discussion here, is it the same thing? People, if they can see the data in front of them on how having an open border the way that we've had has been good for our country, then I say, hey, go for it. But it has not. And, to your point, John, there were many times throughout our history that we would turn off the spigot of immigration, right? I mean, that's been throughout our history. And I might add that there used to be a requirement that you had to offer a skill and or some benefit to the United States to become an immigrant. This is some time ago, but.
Kennedy killed that. There's certain people when I think of political figures that ruined this country. LBJ and Ted Kennedy probably did more than just about anybody else to completely ruin this country. But Ted Kennedy changed us from a country that allowed to immigrate people who fundamentally had our values, more classically well-educated Europeans, especially Eastern Europeans that were being displaced because of religious reasons, all the way back to the Cold War, to this country when they set up this thing where if you can get one person to come into the country, then literally your entire 20-person, not even immediate family, but like, cousins 3 times removed can suddenly come into the country. So we're no longer bringing in people who share our fundamental values and will assimilate into the country. We've got this separatist mentality where you have these unique pockets. I mean, dude, going to go down the rabbit hole. I'm sorry, but like, look what the current administration is willing to do to sell out Israel in order to get those couple of tens of thousands of votes in Michigan. I mean,
Yep,
dude, we have
exactly.
fundamentally sold out our only ally in the area to get, a couple, maybe 10 or 20,000 votes. That's realpolitik right there.
So we were talking about John F. Kennedy there,
Ted
or
Kennedy, he was the one that did
Taking.
the big immigration reform. I think late '60s, early '70s,
oh,
completely
okay, okay.
As a
restructured U.S.
senator, right?
immigration policy.
Oh, wow, okay. Yeah, he's one of my favorite people for sure. Got rip, rest in peace, buddy.
So, well, guys, and I think that kind of segues fairly easy into one of the other stories that we were going to talk about because it has direct relationship to an open border. And
Well,
so,
bro, can
yep,
I
go ahead.
ask real quick? We can just a quick comment on my question earlier. Is this NIBRS system? Do we think it's going to be better? Is it going to be effective for the goal that they've said it's supposed to fill or reach?
Well, my understanding is that so the whole problem is like you have, getting the data into the system and then what you can get out. So it's that whole classic idea of garbage in, garbage out. So I would say this: if the NIBRS information was reported perfectly, it would be hugely valuable, right? But the problem is it's not going to be reported perfectly. You know, again, I just retired from law enforcement. When my officer sits down to write a report, he has to sit there and flag all the NIBRS related events that this thing triggers. And
Ah,
the last thing cops want to do is more paperwork. So,
Mm.
every NIBRS incident that you flag in your incident is a couple more things, boxes you have to click, screens you have to roll through, and stuff like that. So, it's one of those things. If you're a data nerd, I mean, like, I think the NIBRS was clearly designed for data nerds to get the information that they wanted to be able to crunch numbers. I just don't think anybody thought about the practical implementation. How do we get this? How do we get the numbers into the system to analyze them? There's a great cartoon, and there's like this dude, and he's like literally in front of his thesis committee, and he's got this huge equation, and then in parentheses it's like says, then the magic happens, right? And he gets this result, and they're like, can you be a little bit more specific about that middle part? And I think that's where we are. I think the data nerds expected the magic to happen, that we are, by God, the feds. If we tell the states they need to deliver unto us this data, they will do it. And that has not worked out. And I think my understanding is like, they're almost reincarnating UCR. So at least we have some data as far as that stuff goes. It really is disconcerting how hard it is to pull numbers now, right? Up until 2019, you could go to the FBI UCR and everything was in one PDF that you could pull and look at. Now everything's run through the FBI's Crime Data Explorer, I think it's called. And you can get information out, but it's a lot more drop downs. It's certainly not friendly to the guy that has a high school education that's listening to this. Let me just go out and download this and go, oh yeah, homicide is doing this, homicide is doing that. They've raised the barrier of entry into being able to think about this stuff critically, I think, higher. Now we can argue whether that was ill-intentioned or well-intentioned, but the result is none the same. I think I can't remember. I think it was Thomas Sowell that said at a certain point we have to stop looking at policies from the standpoint of what they were intended to do and analyze them for what they actually do. Now, I think this may be one of these cases that, regardless of how well intended it was, the net results of the policy have not been very good. And when you combine that, and again, this is the example I think about this is like we're looking at a very complicated cloth, right? And one of the threads is crime, right? There's other threads that we probably need to be thinking about as far as this stuff goes, like, policing or more specifically depolicing, right? And you really have to, you can pull one thread apart, but you're missing it from the other pieces. So when you combine the more increased difficulty in reporting, the flagrant inaccuracies of reporting, it certainly does give, people an amazing ability to obfuscate as far as that goes. You're always looking for, what evidence supports your position, what would change it. I do think it would be a really interesting hypothetical. Let's say that Trump were to win in 2024 and all of a sudden violent crime goes up because all this reporting is amazingly accurate. I think that would be a very late but probably accurate assessment of what the motivations were, in fact, going on with that.
Well, and Aaron, I'm glad that you circled us back to the NIBRS numbers, because another aspect of that I think that I understand, and I'll digress 1 second, John. You hit it on the head. It's hard to get the data and in a fairly easy way to understand, in those PDFs that they used to produce, because, trying to prepare for this discussion, even though I had quite a bit of NIBRS numbers, it also seems like some of the information that I had 4 months ago is not there, right? I may be wrong on that, maybe the way that I was looking for it, but I swear I'm going to dig in my papers that seem to pile up here. It's going to be interesting at the time when I'm gone, when people go through these papers during these podcasts and see all these notes.
Well, I think that's what I experienced too. Like just trying to find the clearance data for 2022. It's not click once and it's there. It's not that the data isn't available, but every click that you have to make is a little bit of friction in the system. Right. And it's one of these things like we're not at a point yet where they want to keep the data completely away from you, but they can introduce enough points of friction that data becomes less and less easily accessible. I know when I do my annual webinar on crime and stuff like that, I started relying on some of the data collectors, the amalgamators that you had to pay a subscription fee every year to get that data because it takes effort. Like when I wanted to say, for instance, look at the clearance data for 2022, it assumes that I have a good internet connection that I can download quickly with. It assumes that I have a copy of Excel to open up the spreadsheet as far as that stuff goes. And that used to just be available in a PDF that anybody could literally read for themselves. And if you're an educated person with a curiosity in this, is that a big hurdle to cross? No, it isn't, right? But for the layperson to access the information, it's just become that much harder.
Well, one other thing I was going to add, John, is, and you can tell me what you think of this, but I understand that the NIBRS is almost, to use your word, amalgamation of the UCR and a modeling system that the Bureau of Justice Statistics helped the FBI with. Again, that was something I'm pulling from memory that I thought I had read, but it's some form of analysis modeling too. So I'm like, man, you just hit it earlier, and now the magic happens. So I still get concerned that, okay, so we have this combination of UCR efforts and this modeling that also concerns me. So that's like they're trying to make estimates as well. I mean, did you see anything about that, John? I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, as far as estimates and stuff like that, I know that they pretty much had to pull stuff out of their butt for 21. I mean, the data from 21 is a lot of estimates as far as that stuff goes. And they have had to use estimates to fill in the blanks as far as that stuff goes. It goes back to like what's in the crime data reporter versus when you do a Google search. The FBI knows that homicides are over 20,000 a year. But when you go out and you look at the 2022 data in the Crime Data Explorer, it says 17,000. So at a certain point, like when it comes down to, what does the official source say? The official source says homicides were 17,000 and change this past year, or in 2022. Never mind what the CDC data says. Never mind what the the open source information says. It becomes very difficult to track down a number.
Well, then, what that begs the question to me. Someone that I've for my accounting degree. Two aspects. I had to take statistics, right? And how we know that someone will look at a poll and say they only asked 1,500 people. How is that valid? Well, that's because there's a nice equation that says, okay, if you want to extrapolate or apply some sort of assumption over a particular population, there's a specific number that will do that fairly accurately within a confidence interval. But the same thing when we audit companies, we take these samples, same thing, statistics, and we say, okay, if we have this many errors that equal this many dollars, we apply that and multiply that. So we found 10 million in errors, but we can extrapolate that that's really $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
So why, in this instance, can the federal agencies that can pull this data or put this data together, how come they can't extrapolate too? When they just rely on the problems and gathering the data. Hey guys, this is the best we can get.
Well, I think the reason is it's convenient, right? The FBI is not going. So you have this issue in statistics called extrapolation beyond the. I think it's extrapolation beyond the mean, right? You can't assume that the same curve that got you to this point is going to continue as far as that stuff goes. But I mean, in a lot of ways, you don't have to extrapolate. We have the BJS data, right? The BJS shows violent crime rates much higher than the FBI
Yeah,
reports. So to a large
absolutely.
degree, a lot of that extrapolation isn't necessary. Now,
Okay.
the BJS data is not going to get you homicides, right? Because they have to be able to interview the victim. It's not going to get you people under 12 years of age, and it excludes commercial robberies as far as that stuff goes. Like, so, like if you're the clerk in a 7-Eleven and you get robbed, that's a commercial robbery. That's not getting reported to BJS. But BJS gives us a pretty big number, and the BJS has consistently reported much higher levels of violent crime than the UCR ever has. I just, I'm clicking through the PowerPoint that I have as best I could figure, because I tried to crunch some of those numbers. So I'm like, well, what's the best numbers we have? That's Bureau of Justice Statistics, right? We have the CDC homicide. If we combine that, it looks like the UCR is only getting about 23% of the data. So that would be part of your extrapolation right there is like, let's just look at what the BJS plus the CDC says. So, I mean, on average, 2017 to 2022, UCR only caught 23% of the violent crime. And that means that they're going to catch a goodly percentage of they're going to catch 60% of the homicides, right? When you say that we're catching 60% of the homicides, that's not a confidence inspiring number. I'm sorry, we missed 40% of the homicides, something like that. I'd have to find the slide, but it's not very confidence inspiring at all. I think what happens is, in part, I'm not sure if it's conspiratorial as a way, but I would bet if the administration were to change, all of a sudden we start hearing a lot more about BJS data opposed to UCR, because it kind of allows them to pick and choose the data source that they use to justify whatever message they want to promote.
Well, and John, if I could just go off on a single tangent, we can come back to this. Speaking of CDC numbers, and I haven't looked recently to see if they added them back, but that's where it was kind of easy for us to point folks in to the CDC numbers on self-defense usage of firearms. That used to be, if you look at the numbers, 250,000 to 3 million people a year. That a lot of us know and quote. I found it convenient though that they took that information off there at least a couple of years ago. Have either of you looked to see if they put that back, or is it still gone? I just thought of that off
to see that, but for those of you who don't know, there was a big scandal. So in the 90s, Gary Kleck did the first really big study that found that there were the number of defensive gun uses were much larger than they were believed to be. Right. And Kleck was kind of held up to be a heretic. There's no way these numbers are right. Well, apparently CDC had numbers that they had been sitting on, like buried under a spreadsheet kind of a thing. It's like they had the data, they just never bothered to report it. They've been sitting on that number for years. And it may not have said, well, then there's we agree 100% with what Kleck said, but he's like, well, the CDC number says he is not far off. And that got buried. And I think what happened was, that was a page on the CDC data, and then it disappeared. That was a little bit of a scandal. What, about a year back or so? How that data just disappeared. It definitely happened during the Biden administration.
Yeah,
I have not looked to see if that ever got restored back or not. But one of
the nice things about
go ahead. Yeah. One of the nice things about 2024 is you're just left with memory. We just have to remind people that the CDC cannot be trusted to study violence as a public health issue, because they were trusted to. And, they screwed it up back then. There's no reason to believe that they would do it any different this time.
Yeah. Interesting thoughts on all of this. I think really what we can extrapolate is that we know that the Second Amendment, therefore self-defense, a byproduct of the Second Amendment, freaking works. And I've used that data many times to say, okay, if we look at the actual murder rates and or aggravated assault, you look at those numbers versus the self-defense usage. Let's just use the bottom number, 250 or 300,000, right? Can you imagine what those numbers would look like? I'm talking about murder and aggravated assault. If those defensive uses were not even just on the low end, what would our murder and maimed individuals, their numbers look like? I've thought about that multiple times, and that's also information that I use to retort those folks out there that are against the Second Amendment.
I can do you one even better than that. I apologize for not having the numbers memorized and the books in the
You're good,
house and the
buddy.
library, but Kleck did that because he looked at the United States. In burglary in the United States and the United Kingdom is fundamentally different. Most burglaries that take place in the United States involve an unoccupied dwelling. In the United Kingdom, a disturbing amount of burglaries involve an occupied dwelling. Right? And the supposition there is that, when you break into a house in the United States, there's probably a 50-50 chance of there being a gun in that. So that drives a lot of our burglaries to be unoccupied. Right? Well, in Britain, that number is much higher. Well, all you have to do is look at the United States rate of injury in occupied burglaries and said, well, hey, if we had the same rate of occupied burglaries, what would it be? And that number is a very, very large number. The number of lives and injuries that just a large armed populace causes to happen in this country is incredibly unappreciated. But you can quantify that number back in the 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, very, very good point, which we know that, and again, Aaron and I talk about this quite often as well, that, of course, the highest crime rates spiked in the 90s, and of course we know that better policing, more prosecution, plus shell issue concealed carry started to become hugely on the rise. And lo and behold, you add all those things together. I know it's partly correlation, but, crime started going down. But yet we still have individuals that want to take those rights away from us.
A part of that, though, is that you can also say the expansion of concealed carry, people carrying concealed weapons didn't cause more problems.
Right. Yeah. The old adage, hey, it's going to be like the Old West. It's interesting that folks opposing, the addition of concealed carry in whatever area it may be, they use that phrase, hey, it's going to be like the Old West.
Well, it hasn't been in the other 40 states.
Well, you can apply this same. The problem is that people are leading with their politics. They're not looking at the data. So we're supposed to be a federal country, right? In that states get to implement different solutions. And the whole idea is that California can think this is great. And you know what they can do? They can pass laws and try that, right? Like, let's see what happens when we get rid of, shoplifting as effectively a crime. We allow hard drug use and let these states keep it in. And you can sit there and compare. The problem is people have forgotten to do the second part, right? You can sit there. A lot of these policies are they're policy prescriptions. In that, I think I know what the problem is, right? I think I know what the disease is, right? I'm going to apply this medicine. The problem is nobody goes back and sees whether the solution actually worked or not, or they bury the numbers. So if you think that allowing greater access to concealed carry weapons in the public is going to result in all these deaths in the street, at a certain point you go back and do a retrospective look, and did that actually happen? And that did not, that did the same thing, since we're talking CCW, I mean, look what happened with Brazil. Brazil dramatically liberalized its concealed carry under the last president they had, because it used to be only police and military could carry concealed weapons in Brazil. Dude, they shot a lot of criminals and crime went down very, very sharply. And again, I think the situation we're looking at is just very, very complex. It's a very complex tapestry. So, when we talk about that drop in crime in the 90s, that drop was not caused by one thing. The most liberal professor says that increased incarceration probably contributed 30% to that drop, right? Well, that's a big chunk of it. But when you look at, data-driven policing, an armed populace, stuff like eliminating lead paint, the results of Roe versus Wade, improvements in trauma care, there's a combination of reasons that crime drop happened. It's not that one of them mattered, but if, something contributes 5%, something contributes 7%, pretty soon you've got some pretty significant cultural changes. And now what we're trying to do is go back and basically undo these, based on a faulty premises of what the problem is.
Yeah. Awesome points on all. I think when I look at the current direction that we're heading, I still think that we've got enough individuals like us that are preaching this information. I know we got a small audience compared to folks on the national scene, but I still think that we've got a lot of positives in our direction. But man, we certainly have taken our lumps big time, but politically, Second Amendment wise, and when just to mention New York, when they refused to abide, I mean, we're talking essentially separation of powers problems, right? So Article 3, the judiciary says, hey, executive branch, you can't do this. In all honesty, that's supposed to be that way that works. But right now, like you said, they're thumbing. The states are thumbing their nose at those cases the Supreme Court put down, and it's to the point in our nation where the Constitution more and more and more is completely being trampled on. That's what concerns me most.
Nullified.
Nullified. Nullification is a real thing.
I think also that's fundamentally an issue of worldview. Are we I'm not saying the United States is perfect, but I would offer that we're one of the better things to come along, and we've never lived up to all of our aspirations, but at least we've had aspirations, and we've moved a long way from where we started to where we are today. So, is the United States, there's a reason, is the United States a flawed meritocracy that we're constantly working to improve? Or is it a systemically racist country that only seeks to, suppress black and brown people? Those are two fundamentally different worldviews. And the problem is we're indirectly, we're not arguing those worldviews directly, but we're arguing them through policies. And I think what you're starting to see, California's had the proposition, whatever the prop was that changed everything, for about 10 years now. So we have a pretty solid picture of what the results of those kind of decriminalizations are having. And, somebody made a really good point. It wasn't just that they stopped shoplifting below 950 from being a crime. They took away the multiple strikes. So it used to be you could go and you could steal once. And then the second time you stole, the penalty was greater, and the third time it got greater. The biggest problem they had is that, when you steal $950, it's per incident. So I can steal $950 from the store in the morning, come back in the afternoon and steal another $950. But if I get caught, they can't look at the 3 other times that I did that and do enhanced sentencing guidelines for that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the whole idea of mass incarceration, it's not working out. I mean, regardless of whether your libertarian sensibilities are annoyed and tweaked by illegalizing drugs, the problem does seem to be that if you legalize hard drugs, it creates all kind of societal ills that, quite frankly, none of us are willing to put up with. Right. So if I guess I have a minority position here in that when you look at the data on the war on drugs was not perfect, but it was not all bad. I think the data out there now is the war on drugs that we had in the 80s and the 90s did a really good job at dissuading casual drug use, right? It kept a lot of people from becoming addicts. The problem was it does nothing once somebody becomes an addict to get them to kick. Although one of the few things that will tend to get, when you look at the California stuff, is before 47, they could force you into drug court and to go through rehab. The big problem with California is they can't force you into rehab anymore legally as far as that goes. So whether it offends your libertarian sensibilities or not, some kind of drug prohibition is going to be necessary if you want to walk down the street without having your windows broken out of your car, without feces in the street, without being, petty offense crime, serious crime and stuff like that. I think that's just the price we're going to have to pay. The imperfect analogy I have for this is that we moved houses about 8 years ago, right? And before when we moved, I fought this constant battle with the fire ants, right? We had young kids, and I was always out there with the can of fire ant spray trying to kill them all. We changed neighborhoods to where the houses are more affluent, right? Moved up in house a little bit. We don't have really fire ant problems anymore because everybody in my neighborhood kills the fire ants as soon as they go, right? And that's what's happening, right? Is if everybody keeps the fire ants suppressed, it's better for everybody. Yeah, I apologize for the horrible dehumanizing analogy, but that does seem to be the problem. Is if you have an area that won't put up with this stuff, it tends to be a pretty decent place to live. By all accounts, California, beautiful, beautiful scenery. I mean, I went out and taught a Rangemaster handgun instructor class. I'm one of the few people willing to go out to I flew into Oakland and went and taught a Rangemaster instructor class out there, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But I would never want to live there or visit. I got in and out of Oakland so fast your head would spin. Like it was planned deliberately. It's like I'm going to get to this airport shuttle, get in the rental car, get the hell out of Oakland. It was a very deliberate, because Oakland is a shithole. I mean, the only in
Oh
and out
yeah.
to ever have to close isn't Oakland. It's you can actually you can actually, I mean, dude, you're starting to, it's a biblical quote I'm going to find, but like, when there are fruits, you will know them, right? Well, dude, we're seeing the fruits now. It's not working. At a certain point, you have to go, this is not working. We're going to have to put some people in prison to keep the whole thing kind of livable for everybody else.
Boy, I experienced the glory of In and Out when I was on a little tour with one of my bands. We were in LA. We were there for like 4 days or something like that. Literally had In and Out for every meal.
In and
Dude, that
out
was
is
like
good.
the great tragedy of the Oakland was the In and Out was right by the
That's
airport. So if you got off the airplane or you were going to the airport and you wanted your last In and Out, it was like the last point. And literally the Scroats would hang out in the parking lot. It got to the point that you could only safely go through the drive-through. If you parked your car in the parking lot, it was getting broken into, to the
dang.
point that they've closed the restaurant now. They did
That
not.
is a true tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, dude, if you don't fumigate for cockroaches, the cockroaches are going to congregate. That's just the sad reality of the world we live in.
Well, and John, to your point about the failed meritocracy versus the antithesis of that is currently this social justice movement that, hey, right in line with what you're talking about, um, the horrible mass incarceration that the social justice warriors are all, trying to change policies over and let more people out of prison. And, there's probably, plenty of folks that were put in prison incorrectly. I mean, that's across the board. That's going to happen. But for the most part, there's plenty of evidence to support putting those violent criminals in prison. And this whole American Marxism that, hey, we've got, we're not going to prosecute people for property crime because there's been injustice against them and they just need to eat. They just need clothes on their back. I would much rather have a failed meritocracy, and unfortunately there's a good swath of society that doesn't believe in that meritocracy.
Well,
I
that's
hope it changes.
because the social institutions have been taken over. So, we used to have this thing called civics when I went to high school, and you were supposed to understand American government and stuff like that. One of the things I was greatly amused by at TechCon this year, Lee Weems took a class called Tactical Civics, right? And it's everything you're supposed to know about how the country is supposed to run that nobody bothers to tell you anymore. There's supposed to be a somewhat reasonable test you have to take to become a U.S. citizen. I would bet that most of the people who are casting ballots could not pass that test as far as that stuff goes. But I think that's because of the takeovers of the institutions of education. I mean, all the way back, Dewey 20s and the 30s, as far as stuff like that goes. So,
Dewey, yep. A card carrying communist, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, if all your teachers are saying we're a systematically racist country and that the founding fathers, were this and the founding fathers were that, whether that's factually accurate or not, when your authority figures are telling you that's what you tend to believe, and you don't have any faith in the system. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is kind of a crisis of faith. Somebody's made the point when we look at war and stuff like that, we probably don't have the resolve to go out and win World War II right now. We would not be willing to sacrifice the number of people it would take, and we would not be willing to stack the bodies like it would take to win another engagement of that level. And I think a lot of that has taken place on the domestic front as well. It's a crisis of faith. Nobody thinks we're the good guys anymore. That's why the war on police has been so detrimental. Right? Policing is not perfect. Policing is not a scalpel. It is not a surgical tool. It is a blunt tool that is just what is necessary a lot of times to keep things safe and sane for everybody. Historically, for the longest time, immigrant populations, most notably like the Italians and the Irish, were kind of their own little enclaves, and we just let them kill each other because that's what the Irish did. That's what the Italians did. That's just how those people are. Up until the point that we said, no, we've got to integrate them into society, and we started to police the hell out of them. And in a couple of generations, they become productive members. They become they adopt a larger cultural view, and they're utterly assimilated into that worldview. as opposed to the model we have now, in which disparate groups get to maintain that distinct identity. I mean, everybody forgets the reason that it was called a paddy wagon. This is like the transport van the police used. Was paddy was like the N-bomb equivalent for an Irishman back in the day. That's the
Wow.
historical view that we need to be looking at.
I was thinking about the other day why they were called paddy wagons. Holy cow.
Dude, there used to be signs that said no dogs, no Irish. That was a thing for a while.
Well, wow. and Lee, we had Lee on not too long ago, and he spoke about that lecture he was gonna provide down at TACCon. We were really sad that we weren't able to be there. I told Lee, I was like, man, you need to do that on a road show or do it on online. I think there's good reason to do stuff like that online, and I will peddle what I believe is such an awesome resource, and we've talked about it on here before, is, I studied the Constitution in school. Our schools did an okay job of giving us a primer on the Constitution. But man, I did not understand the Constitution near as well as I do now until I took a couple of Hillsdale's free online courses on the Constitution. It would be awesome if we could, if that could be information that's out in the masses, how much better our country will be if the majority of our citizens understood those fundamentals. Man, I think we would be doing a lot better.
See, there you are, being a right-wing zealot, talking about this Constitution thing like those rules still apply. To be fair, I actually own on my Kindle. You can actually get the USS Constitution for Kindle. What's amazing to me is it's not a very long document. It's not long. It's amazingly concise and getting the balance of powers right.
Yeah, I mean, it's this big, and I should know the exact pages of the document. What is it? 26 pages. I'm going to mess up. I should know the exact number, but I mean, there's 46 in this document. Of course, it's a little pamphlet that's got some other information in there, but yeah, it's not long at all.
Hey, see my BCM hat? Every time I've got something from BCM, I get one of those little pocket Constitutions. So I've got a handful of them in there on top of my gun safe.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of these, and they ride in my bags with me if I'm concerned about remembering something correctly, and it's just so easy to open up. And it is intended for the layman as well. The Constitution, in 18th century vernacular, but it still is fairly easy to understand.
We can argue about what points we went wrong, but a lot of the problems we have in this country is with trying to bypass that document. The easy one would be the popular election of senators. That completely destroyed.
Man, you just beat me to that, man. Go ahead.
That completely the states always had concerns about their rights being upheld. And what nobody appreciated at the time was what popular election of senators would do to the states. The states, for those who don't know, the states used to appoint their senators. So the senators knew that they were representing the Commonwealth of Virginia or the great state of Nevada and stuff like that. And they voted in those interests. As soon as senators became popularly elected, it completely changed all the dynamics and allowed a corruption on that side of the Congress that had not been seen before, and which had been intentionally designed to not be that way. That was one of the fail safes.
Yep, the 17th Amendment. That's one of the first amendments that should be abolished if we had a good Article 5 solution, if it ever comes through. What we're sitting at, like 19 states, I believe it is now, have voted to hold a convention. And there's a lot of other states that have resolutions that they're trying to get through their legislatures. I think that's going to be one of the only ways we're really going to save our republic. I think all three of us are old enough that, our republic likely in some form still going to be around when we pass. But until we actually make some changes like the abolishment of the 17th Amendment, add term limits, I can just go down the list, balanced budget amendment, all of those important amendments. If we don't go down that road, I just don't see how our our republic's going to last much longer. I'm just being honest. It may sound like a doomsday assessment, but we do have individuals in this government that don't really believe it, or it's not that they don't believe in it; it's that they hate the Constitution.
No, it was a document written by a bunch of evil racists to suppress us all. So why would you have any love for that as far as that goes? Within their worldview, how does it? I'm not saying they're right, but within their worldview, that's logically consistent. I guess would be a good way to put that.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Well, gents, I don't know. Do we want to segue into this other story? We don't have to spend a whole lot of time on this, 'cause this is just a cautionary thing. We want to go ahead and move on to this story here in North Carolina.
Send it, man. Send it.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen out there in the audience, a lot of you may have heard of this story. I'm here in North Carolina. I live very close to where this incident took place, and I didn't know about it. There were no warnings at work there. I just find it baffling that it's not a huge national story, but it's not. Frankly, the story that I'm reading from here in just a second is in the North Carolina section of Fox News. So I find that interesting. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and read this story real quick. It's not too long. Mysterious shooting outside Army Special Forces residence in North Carolina raises questions. And this is written by Jennifer Griffin. A lot of folks probably know who Jennifer Griffin is.
Oh, yeah.
And she's an awesome national security and foreign correspondent. And I think it looks like she's back at Fox now. I think she was working elsewhere. I think she's done a lot of, for lack of a better term, doing her own subcontracting as a reporter. Probably incorrect terminologies, but anyway, it's written by her. So, a mysterious shooting in North Carolina, north of Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, not far from where some of America's most elite special operations forces live and train, is under investigation by the Army Criminal Investigation Division, as well as local police. The shooting in Carthage, North Carolina, occurred May 3rd at 8:15 p.m. following a phone call about a suspected trespasser near a Special Forces soldier's property. Two Chechen men who spoke broken English were found near the soldier's home. The family alleges the suspected intruder, 35-year-old Ramzan Dariev, I believe is how that's pronounced, of Chicago, was taking photos of their children. When confronted near a power line in a wooded part of the property, an altercation ensued and Dariev was shot several times at close range. A second man, I won't even try to pronounce his name, was in a vehicle. I'll digress a second, like Mark Levin would say, yabba dabba doo. Was in a vehicle some distance from the incident and was questioned by authorities and then released. The Moore County Sheriff's Office is leading the investigation. The FBI told Fox News, our law enforcement partners at the Moore County Sheriff's Office contacted the FBI after a shooting death in Carthage. A special agent met with investigators and provided a linguist to assist with the language barrier for interviews. And I'll just point this out. To my knowledge, I don't think it's in this particular story. It was discovered that these two individuals were illegal. So Sheriff Ronnie Fields said in a statement, the caller indicated that an individual was observed taking photographs on the property and had become aggressive towards a resident outside their home. The deceased was found approximately 250 yards from the roadway, along a power line and on the residential property. Identification was not initially found on Dariev. However, his identity was later confirmed through family members and an international identification located in his vehicle. The shooter has been identified as a colonel with the United States Army who resided at the location of a shooting. I'm just going to stop there for a second. So a colonel in U.S. Special Forces, that's an 06. a fairly high, not a high-ranking officer. I really wonder, and I'm hoping we'll find out more about this. What exactly happened? I would imagine that a colonel in Special Forces probably has some decent emotional control. So I'm really curious what exactly happened.
Well, that's a good point.
Yep. Back to the story. U.S. Special Operations soldiers around the country have experienced strange interactions in recent years that they say involve suspicious surveillance of them and their families. Many believe that U.S. military bases have become an increasing target of foreign probes. The shooting incident 2 weeks ago in Carthage could have been a case of mistaken identity. The two Chechens had no personal identification. They did have 2 cell phones with Russian language contacts and camera equipment. They were not wearing any uniforms for the power company that reportedly employed them. And I'll stop there. In another story, it was discovered that the company that employs them was founded by a CEO out of Moldova, which is former Soviet Union, and that the vice president was also a Russian immigrant. I find that interesting, which I'll make a point on here in a second. So, I'll start paraphrasing some of this so I don't get too long-winded here. But, they were found with no identification. The incident was reported to the U.S. Department of Labor and OSHA. Sources tell Fox News that power company equipment is often a cover for status of action. That was the point that I was going to make. The U.S. intelligence agents use for surveillance of foreign targets overseas. So I think I can go ahead and stop it right there because, that gives us the gist of the story. I'm just going to give my assessment, just my thoughts on it. I'm not an intelligence officer or somebody within the intelligence community, but I mean, my first thoughts on that was that this looks exactly like something for a cover for action. I mean, that's just what it looks like to me. I'll just throw it back at you, John. What are your thoughts on this incident?
Several thoughts. I thought that I've got a similar news story pulled up, and I just think this is a great contextualization. Are asking why 2 Russian-speaking Chechens were taking photos near an elite Army Special Forces resident at 8:15 on Friday night, 10 minutes after sunset, right? So when you put that context, it really does kind of make you scratch your head. I think you have to take the bigger picture on this in that large-scale terrorist attacks are not turnkey operations. I think all this is public disclosure as far as that stuff goes now. But one of the jobs I did early in my career was right after 9/11. I went and stood guard on the Hoover Dam. Like they literally had checkpoints going to and from the dam. You had to screen vehicles and stuff like that. Well, part of the briefing we got on that was that Muhammad Atta had taken the hard hat tour of the dam 3 times. They had him on surveillance, right? So they literally spent years driving around the country developing target packages. So were they probably there to do harm to the colonel? No. Were they there to get information that could be used to do harm to the colonel or his community in the future? I think that's a far more likely explanation. Again, the 10 minutes after sunset on a Friday, I mean, could they in theory have been power line contractors? I mean, that might be a great cover story. It gets them close to where they need to be. But that's the kind of intelligence development that you typically see. Again, 9/11 was not a turnkey operation. It took years to put together. I think you would be completely stupid to think that our enemies aren't out there doing these ongoing assessments. Let's forget forget who the Chechens are. The Russians fought a very, very nasty, effectively, you can call it insurrection, a civil war, jihad. I mean, against the Chechens for years. And the problem with the Chechens is they look European, right? They're blonde-haired, blue eyes. They can fit in very easily with Western society, but some of them are fundamentalist, radical Muslims. I think there was pretty good intelligence that the hit on the Blackwater contractors that set off Fallujah, I thought it was fairly well known that those were Chechens that did that, right? So they don't have the whole inshallah, God wills it attitude when it comes to shooting you. They actually, align the sights and press the trigger straight back. So the Chechens have always been a huge threat. So when you start putting all those pieces together, it certainly does does make you wonder what they were up to, and it was this part of a larger ongoing intelligence operation. And I think that's why the whole, falling out of favor, see something, say something matters, in that you typically don't find the guy that's setting up your assassination, if I remember right. What you do is you typically will detect the surveillance they're trying to put together to figure out routes and stuff like that. So my initial impression is that's what it sounds like. But the other part of this is you're not going to know what this is, because if there is important intelligence that they've uncovered, they're not going to come out and roll that information out either. If the FBI does identify a large Chechen terrorist ring, that's probably not going to make the evening news as far as that stuff goes.
Well, and there's a degree of that in my mind. That there's certain information, especially if it's an ongoing intelligence gathering operation on our part, that a lot of that stuff is kept secret. I will tell you, it's been fairly tight-lipped around here. I've been asking around a lot of people, and of course, I won't mention who those people are, but yeah, it is tight-lipped for certain. And here's one other thing that's interesting. So the subcontractor company is called Utilities One, but just listen to the specialties of this company: infrastructure solutions for telecommunications, electric and gas utilities, cellular companies, and technology deployment sector. So what does that say to me? It's like they don't specialize in any one industry. They just seem to specialize in all of infrastructure.
It's almost like if you wanted a turnkey solution to all the critical infrastructure, it's all in one place. Amazing.
Yeah, just happens to be a person founded from Moldova who still has, I know it's not the Soviet Union any longer, but let's just face it, that also could be. But anyway, all I'll say is that this is another good example of why we don't want our borders open. And this is just kind of, folks need to be aware of things that are going on like this, because, it's some serious shit going on out there. And, I'm just afraid that this open border, that there are a much greater number of cells of either terrorist and or simply, near peer countries that are have increased their operations against the United States within the United States. So, well, fellas, unless you guys got anything else on that, I guess we can move on to our last jovial conversation, if you like.
Boy, I'll just say, guys, thanks for all the information you guys brought, because I've been sitting here learning a ton. I appreciate it being just a part of it, guys. Now,
cool.
I am curious, John, as I'm thinking about some of the music I've been listening to lately. Man, what have you been listening to lately?
So unfortunately, I don't get to listen to that much music, because all I do is listen to. I don't watch YouTube videos; I listen to them. But like, one of the cool discoveries I had about a year ago, and like when I get in the mood, I highly recommend it. Have you guys ever heard of a band called Too Many Zoos?
That's a kick-ass name for
like,
one thing.
This New York City subway band that's like, there's no vocals. It's all, they have this unique music called Brass House and stuff like that. But if you would, it's like, just go to YouTube, type in Too Many Zoos, and look at their cover of I Will Survive. Dude, it is just freaking awesome music of something like, as Mighty Python says, now for something completely different, try Too Many Zoos, their cover of I Will Survive.
I'll check that out. I'm looking it up right now.
Are you talking about the 70s hit I Will Survive?
Absolutely, baby. Disco classic.
Hey,
again, covered very well by Cake, I might add.
Oh, Cake's another great band. You know what? So part of being a musician is being exposed to so many bands, so many. I think about it sometimes. I have had to learn thousands of songs, thousands of musical parts, right? So when you hear lots of band names, a lot of them are, a lot of them don't stand out to you, but because Frank Zappa was brilliant at putting words together for song titles and album titles that, I mean, even though apparently he did zero drugs, he must have been slightly mentally ill. And I'm serious, to come
I
up
agree
with
with that.
some of the stuff that he came up with, like an album called Pick Me, I'm Clean. That's brilliant, actually. Just brilliant words that are nonsense, but at the same time, you know, in some parallel universe could mean something, right?
I mean, those words spoken in a strip club take on an entirely different meaning.
Pick me, I'm clean.
That's precisely what I was thinking.
Well, so but
or a bar in Thailand.
Oh my, Eric, I know what story you're talking about, bro. Yeah, some wives may not like to hear about that story. If your husband's going to Thailand, you might want to dig into where he's going. Okay? That's all I'm going to say. But back to the name. So that's why I'm saying I get excited even about that name, Too Many Zoos. So that's cool. See why we talk about this shit, man? Because here at the end, we have a fun little conversation.
And just levity to wind out a very serious conversation.
Because you guys are making me depressed, man.
Just for the record, because I've told my wife that story, I got finagled in outside. Of course, we were coming back from an exercise, and we were staying there at a very nice hotel in Bangkok. Is it the JM Marriott? I think it is, or JP Marriott. I get the name mixed up. 5-star hotel, but it's right next to Nana Plaza. And which, if anybody knows anything about Bangkok, Nana Plaza is where all the weird stuff's going on. That's where, like, if anybody watched, what was it, Hangover 2 or 3, where they went to Soy Cowboy. Well, Soy Cowboy is in Nana Plaza. But yeah, a buddy of mine's like, hey man, I want to go have a drink down here. There's this bar I heard about. I was like, yeah, I'm kind of wanting to stay in. And nah, man, you gotta go. You know, so we go down there, and yeah, I mean, I didn't stay for long. I'm being straight and honest. Yeah, all the women there, they were all in their birthday suit. They were wearing nothing but shoes. So yeah.
So Eric, so can I expound on that a little bit? For our audience, we might.
I think we're going to have to place explicit on this particular show.
That's exactly what I was about to say. This show's going to have the little E next to it.
But, yeah, it was crazy, man.
So John, if you haven't heard this story, or you haven't, I bet you're a world traveling, 007 kind of guy. But
far from it, my friend.
I just want to be nice and assume, not act like you just wouldn't know anything about this is the point. But yeah, Eric said that they went to that bar and there was just beautiful women, just basically like a buffet. I'm sorry to say it like that, but just beautiful naked women. Just, I guess you just went in there and
yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, they were wearing two things. They were wearing shoes and numbers. That was it. Yeah. Needless to say, I didn't stick around there that long because I am a faithful husband. But just seeing the whole thing was crazy, man.
Nothing good could come from that scene, and I'm pretty sure nothing can be good at this point in the podcast. Sorry, honey.
but in all honesty, that's I keep saying that. As honest as I am, I straight up told my wife about that. I'm like, yeah,
Well, that's not something that you want getting back to your wife, not coming from your mouth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's time to really make that clear.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to music. Oh boy.
Do you really have something to say about music, bro, or are you
No,
calling in?
I'm
you calling in the bumper music that I'm about to push play on?
Unless John has anything else on music.
It was him, not me, honey. Just to be very, very clear. I've never been to Bangkok or Thailand, for that matter.
You know, I do have to clarify something. Thailand is a beautiful country. You know, when I was, of course, I was there for work. I've been there a couple of times. I went to Thai boxing camps, trained at Thai boxing camps. You know, saw a lot of saw the Lying Buddha. You know, saw some stayed at some amazing places, met amazing people. There is definitely the one night in Bangkok aspect of Thailand, but 99% of that country is just a really cool place.
You get that reference? Was it Maori from the early '80s? One Night in Bangkok.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Yeah,
I remember that song being on the radio and it driving me up the wall.
Yes, same here. I heard it.
I remember being a young, naive boy and having to have my sister explain that song to me. So.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm trying to think back to the lyrics in my mind to get a reference on that, but I'll look it up here later.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think no impromptu karaoke, guys. Come on.
I need to work on my vocal cords to sing again. But well, guys, I think that's a good note to put a bow on the whole thing. No surprise here that we would have a blast, the three of us hanging out. Too bad we aren't here together in front of a big microphone just chatting it up. Maybe one of these days we can do that after TACCon or something, if we aren't just falling asleep in our hotel rooms. But one of these days we'll get to do something like that. That is the thing about this show. All the friends we made. It's too bad we can't get together with all of them at some point. So
yeah, and the truth be told, John, again, at some point when I work out all of my usage of ranges here, I definitely want to bring you in for some of your classes, like your cognitive pistol and whatnot. And we definitely want to do that. We're going to make that happen, buddy.
Yeah, at the risk of, shameless braggadocio, dude, cognitive pistol will change your whole world. It's a paradigm changing class because it's not about shooting. We always worry about speed and accuracy. Well, the missing metric is discrimination, and we will make you work on discrimination for 2 solid days. And you will never be more grateful being a really, really good shot when you have to put a lot of mental energy into making that go decision. So again, it's one of my specialties. I've had 4 years to refine my craft, and I am an incredibly horrible, evil person when it comes to the torturing of students at this point.
And John, we say this all the time. How do you develop mindset? You do hard things. And also, how do you learn how to make better decisions? Man, you got to be under pressure. And it's not always ECQC pressure. I have to sit there and think. I know that I would feel a boatload of pressure under your course, but you know what, man, I welcome that stuff. I know Aaron does too.
Oh yeah, well, I was just about to say, well, that'll give me another excuse to go visit Eric.
Yep. Well, cool. Well, gents, you all have a good one, and John, we're excited about having you on the show more, man. We'll come up with more and more subjects to throw your way.
Gotcha. Well, anytime. Just let me know, man.
Cool. All right, guys. Take it easy.
Take care.
All right. Bye.